Hey everyone, due to the sensitive nature of many of the topics that I talk about, my videos generally do not get monetized. So if you'd like to donate at all in any capacity, there are links down below, specifically a Patreon. Thank you very much everybody for watching. So I keep getting people tagging me in this video, so let me go through it and explain to you why it's incorrect.
So this is a question I get asked a lot. Can white people experience racism in America?
Sure.
First, let's understand the word racism. It ends with ism, much like capitalism. The same ism. Communism, the same ism. Socialism, the same ism. So what does that ism mean? Ism means a system put in place by those in power.
So right off the bat, incorrect, right? You could very easily go look this up. Ism is a distinctive doctrine cause or theory. What Jolly Good Ginger here is trying to do is trying to conflate doctrines like racism, which are specific doctrines that one race is superior to another, with some kind of a systemic issue. It's not. Now, is there systemic racism? For sure, but racism fundamentally isn't systemic racism. There is a distinct difference between individual and systemic racism. So right off the bat, just the dishonest perpetuation of what the word ism means completely kills the argument. This is pretty standard stuff for leftist ideology, where somebody will propose something that's incorrect and then they'll build off of that incorrect assertion. Problem is that when you have a bad foundation for an argument, the rest of your argument is also bad.
Specific set of ideas. For example, capitalism, a system put in place by those in power centered around capitalist ideas. Communism is a system put in place by those in power centered around communist ideas. Socialism is a system put in place by those in power centered around socialist ideas. So what is racism? It's a system put in place by those in power centered around racist ideas.
By that logic, I suppose veganism is a system of power and not just a doctrine or ideology. But of course, that's preposterous. And so again, this argument is very easily invalidated.
So then, can white people experience racism?
Individual,
when
yeah.
Somebody says to you, cracker, honky, I don't trust white people, colonizer, white devil, that you're experiencing racism.
Possibly. I think that's rather reductionist. Just because people call you that doesn't necessarily mean those things are racist. I think oftentimes when we talk about these things, we're assuming that just because we want to maintain the idea that white people can be the victims of individualized racism means that like everything must be racist to the same degree as saying something towards a black person. Those different things don't have the same loading as the derogatory slurs towards black people at all. And we understand that there is a difference between individual and systemic racism.
Well, you're not. Let me explain. What you're experiencing is called prejudice.
And so this is like another gaslight. We all know that the dictionary definition of racism is prejudice based on race. It's a very simple thing. Now, what he's referring to is the sociology and anthropology definition of racism, which conflates individual and systemic racism because those are studies of society, which makes sense for them to not contextualize individual racism. But on an individual level, we should be treating each other equally. And it comes down to a very simple question of, as a white man, what am I expected to do when I see a black person at the grocery store? Do I get down on one knee, put my fist up, and let them cut the line? Or do I treat them the same? Individually, I treat them the same. That is why individually, everybody can experience racism. Systemically, we can't. Right? So what you're supposed to do is treat everybody equally in a colorblind manner on an individual level while advocating for systemic change by looking at particular systems that disproportionately negatively impact people, marginalized groups, and change them. You vote to change those things.
Prejudice is when someone has an idea about you based purely on the way you look. The reason that's not racism is this. The black community is incarcerated at a rate 3 times higher than white people for the same crime.
Yeah, sure. So this is going to get into honest conversation. So yes, black people are incarcerated at 3 times higher rate than white people for the same crimes. Yes, black people disproportionately cause more crime due to a culture that comes from systemic racism, a history of legitimate government oppression. 100%.
Are shot by the police at a rate 3 times higher.
Same argument was that one. But also there's a conversation that we're not usually having, and that's about historical trauma being inside of this situation. Black people are generally taught to dislike police and the system due to things that happened in the past that may not necessarily be happening now. And it's completely understandable.
Than white people. A traditional black name on a resume will receive a callback 5 times less commonly than a traditional white name.
So what you have to understand is that when we talk about traditional, it's actually these distinctions in names only started happening, actually in the 1960s. Before that, people pretty much chose the same names. What we have to understand is that even by the document that you're looking at, this is attributed to socioeconomic status more than anything else. These names aren't associated with black people necessarily. They're associated with impoverished black people who live in communities that are very dependent on welfare. There's no other name of any other race that is associated with being on welfare. And unfortunately, the stereotype of people on welfare is that they don't work hard, right? I have family on welfare. Frankly, I wouldn't hire them, right? So I would say that's more of a class issue than anything else. The fact that black people are disproportionately more poor is a systemic racism issue. But the fact that people aren't getting hired for having names that are associated with welfare, I would say is more of a classist issue. But it goes even further than that when you really look into it. You see, since black people are disproportionately poor due to systemic racism, they are also disproportionately a higher population that will work for low-skilled labor jobs, right? Now, low-skilled labor jobs are a coin toss for anybody who knows. We're talking about jobs like McDonald's. And so if you're an employer and you're hiring low-skilled labor, what you know that if you hire somebody, there's like a chance that they're going to suck. Problem is that if a white person is hired and they suck, you can fire them indiscriminately. However, due to affirmative action, if you hire low-skilled black labor and they suck and you fire them, you can get sued. And so well-intentioned programs like affirmative action actually have the negative impact of decentivizing hiring low-skilled black labor.
White people are not victims of racial profiling, redlining.
That's true. I can't find a single instance. That's systemic racism, 100%. That's 100%. But again, your whole argument is that we need to conflate individual and systemic racism. My argument is that we don't need to. So those are systemic racism issues.
Gentrification.
Gentrification, I think, might be one of the most ignorant points that you bring up here. Gentrification is a poor issue. It's not a black issue. Now, again, black people are disproportionately poor, which means that gentrification would disproportionately negatively impact black people. But gentrification isn't a race issue. It's a class issue, 100%. And I also don't like the ideology generally when it comes to gentrification is that we shouldn't gentrify poor areas. It really bothers me because the solution is like, oh, well, we shouldn't make these areas better. That's what gentrification is. It's making an area better, but also more expensive. The solution is always, oh, let's not gentrify these areas because then poor people won't be able to live there. Rather than let's give poor people the means to live in a gentrified area.
You see, the system targeting marginalized communities is racism. So even though a white person may experience prejudice, they'll never have to worry about being targeted by the entire system. And that's what racism is.
So fundamentally, I agree with what he's saying. I just split individual and systemic racism. I could make a very solid long-form argument I have before that you should separate individual and systemic racism because we are individuals that live in a society. The biggest issue that I have with this argument is that leftists specifically are very, very, very focused on symbolism like this. At the end of the day, whether you like it or not, redefining the term racism does absolutely nothing for impoverished black people in the ghetto. This is a virtue signal. I think it's well-intentioned, but it's harmful. It doesn't do anything. Does this help the black kid not get targeted by police? No, it doesn't. This is privileged progressive ideology that makes people feel good and make them feel like they're actually achieving something when they're not. It's harmful and it's caustic. And at the end of the day, what we need to do, rather than sit here and talk about all this performative bullshit, is we need to start having conversations about the solution. That is an expansion of opportunity, in my opinion, through universal basic income, as well as targeting the systems that disproportionately negatively impact black Americans, like the prison system and decriminalizing drugs. Hey everyone, if you liked that video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And don't forget to follow my Twitch, Instagram, Twitter, Discord, and TikTok. All links are in the description. Also, check out my Patreon if you'd like to support me even more than you already do. Thank you so much, everyone. I love you all.